Hello and welcome to Love Fools with me, your host, Terri Shield, where we are hopelessly devoted to exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you by Love School, where we explore loving self, others, and everything. Join us there for deeper exploration at www.loveschool.uk. Now for today's episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Love Fools with me, Terri Shield. Thank you so much for being here. This episode today is going to be on the theme of oneness and oneness. And I'm going to be unpacking our need to be autonomous versus our need to belong. In other words, I'm talking once again about boundaries. So thank you so much for being here. And if this sounds like something that will benefit you, please keep listening. It's going to be a deep dive. So I'm going to unpack a couple of things that just keep coming up, things that keep coming up again and again and again within my work, with the people that I'm supporting, the same themes that I just keep seeing online, keep seeing in the patterns of people's lives and the struggles that we have. And very often it comes down to boundaries. So you may have heard me say some of these things that I'm going to speak about before. You may see similar themes because, like I say, this is something that is really, really at the root of what we're trying to heal with Love School and everything that we're looking at. Because boundaries starts with self-love. That is loving yourself. And through learning how to understand to love ourselves is how we understand better how to communicate with, interact with, and create relationships with others in order to get the love that we want with others. And again, that relationship kind of ripples out into our connection with society, with the world, with the environment, and kind of the bigger picture of things. They're all connected, and they're all connected very often based around this idea of boundaries and a conflicting idea within us about oneness. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to also apologize. So a little bit different. If you're used to watching on YouTube, I'm really sorry. Today, I'm not being videoed. I'm not recording. I am recording this on audio only because I am at the tail end. I hope it's the tail end of some awful bug. And I really want to get this recording out as promised. And anyone who's listened to me over time will know that things like deadlines and that sort of thing can sometimes be a bit restrictive for a creative type like me, but it's really important to me that I keep up with the schedule of the Love Fools podcast. So to be honest, I had kind of put it off a little bit because I wasn't feeling my best, and nobody wants to hear someone coughing and spluttering and sniffling on during a podcast. So I've waited until the very last minute and I'm recording today. But to be honest, I wasn't up for video, so that's why that's not there. This is me setting a boundary. I am, and I'll unpack it, like I say, in the deep dive of the talk, but I'm meeting my needs. I'm meeting my needs because actually I didn't want to be videoed today. I don't want to be seen. I want to feel comfortable, cozy, and nurtured, because as my immune system's doing its thing and helping me through this bug and feeling better. But I also still want to meet your needs as my audience, as people who will be interested in this topic. And so I found something that works for me and where you still get what you need out of our arrangement, our relationship, our connection. So all that being said, I'm going to do my very best to give you an excellent show to listen to today, to really, really help solidify the idea of boundaries and then how you can navigate that while being an individual and still wanting to be connected to others and part of a group. I love this idea of oneness. It's a principle that I have used time and time again to find comfort in this process, to stay connected with my spirituality, my connection with the earth, my connection with humanity, while still honoring myself. And it's this idea of oneness. Now, depending where you are, potentially politically, culturally, in your own healing journey, in the power dynamic of society, oneness might initially have one or the other kind of definition for you or associations for you. To some people, oneness means individuality. It means I'm one person. I am responsible for myself. I'm an individual. I am independent from the system. I can make my own choices. I have free will. All of this idea that we are one single unit. And that is true. Especially as adults, we are one individual part of a bigger picture system. We don't have to acknowledge that system necessarily. I don't think I've ever met anyone ever who operates outside of the structures and systems that we have, not fully. And I've had experience where I've met people who live in very different ways. The other idea of oneness is this idea, very often this is like a Buddhist idea, people, a new agey idea. If you start meditating and opening up to spirituality, it's this idea of oneness, that we are a one with everything. We are connected with everything, that there's this thread of one creation, God, if you would like to call it that, unity, consciousness, that there's some sort of thread that actually connects us to everything else that's alive. And there's wisdom in that, like the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, has always, existed. There are elements in the air that we breathe that was breathed, you know what I mean? That was breathed by dinosaurs, by every other human being on the planet. The air that we share is universal. The water that we drink is ultimately connected to one larger water system. The planet that we live on, is we're all connected with each other energetically in one way or another. So there's this idea of spiritual oneness and being at one with nature and being part of a collective. So that also has elements of truth in it, and that also exists. And especially depending, as I said, on your role in society and the power dynamic that you're currently experiencing, the responsibilities you have, the connections, it can kind of depend on how you view the idea of oneness, often based on our experience. And the solution for me to understand boundaries is to understand that both of that exists. So that we are one individuals and we are part of a collective system. That actually, without the collective system, one individual cannot survive. And without these individuals, the system, the collective of us cannot survive. So we are one individually and we are one spiritually, but we're also one of both parts of that. So when setting boundaries, when we think about what the process is of setting boundaries, to me, a boundary is that mark, that identifying mark between where my oneness ends and otherness begins. So as part of a system, of a collective system made up of individuals, there is me and there is the rest. There are others. And as individuals, we can control ourselves. And that, and even that can take some self-development, right? And consciousness and awareness. But ultimately, all we can control is ourselves, our choices, how we respond to the experiences of life. Other, we can't control. We can't control things that are outside of ourselves. We can't control the experiences that come to us. We can't control so much of life, and that is the other. And the boundary for me, boundary setting, is that line. It's like, well, actually, where do I draw the line of what I can control and what I am and am not willing to do, be, experience, tolerate, make space for, give energy to, give my attention to? What am I willing to welcome into my experience as an individual? And what am I not prepared to participate in all that happens in life? In its simplest form, like, that is the boundary. And I can give you a little metaphor. If you like metaphors, this is what I've been using to support some of my clients to understand this in the past month or so. It's like the metaphor of being on a river or being in a body of water and having a rubber ring. Without the rubber ring, we're not going to survive as long. We're going to struggle because the body of water is way bigger than us. And the body of water being like life, the flow of life, the ups and downs, the turbulations, the patterns, the flow, and us trying to be an individual surviving in that. So we create this rubber ring, and the rubber ring is our boundary. So our experience is kind of dependent on this rubber ring. Now, that rubber ring it's vulnerable. It can be damaged. It can be damaged by us, and it can be damaged by other people or our environment. So in order to protect the rubber ring, to protect our boundaries, we have to make choices as to how to best protect the rubber ring, because it's the rubber ring that's helping us as an individual survive in the complexity of life and life experience. We might choose to connect with other people in order to help us better survive and maybe even thrive through life. It might be the case that you become responsible for other people, you create other people, and that you have to host them on your rubber ring, or you have to teach them how to inflate and create their own rubber ring. And we might make attachments based on these rubber rings, but actually other people can damage our rubber rings. And if we let too many people onto our rubber ring, it'll become pointless because it'll deflate or it can get damaged, and then we're all drowning. I don't know if that's going to help for the visual, but it was much easier when I had it drawn. So I could draw that for you. But it's ultimately our job to protect ourselves and then our rubber ring, and the rubber ring is the boundaries. And very often we have a need as individuals to survive ourselves, but we also want to enjoy the experience with other people. We want a sense of belonging. We want a sense of community, to feel like we're not so alone in the world, because it can make us less vulnerable to have those attachments to other people, to be supported, to be, connected to lots of other rubber rings, especially if life gets really hard and the flow really changes. And it's up for us to then decide when we're attached to these different groups and for how long, and also when to detach. And that's very often where the conflict comes in, because sometimes people might not want us to detach. We might be in a important position. It's not the exact language I was looking for there. Integral position to be attached to other people, to hold these. We might be holding other people's rubber rings in place in one way or another. And anytime we make these attachments to people, and this can be physically, energetically, when we're connecting, intentionally connecting and holding others within our experience, other people might fear us from detaching because it's going to affect them. It's going to affect their security, stability. It's going to make them more vulnerable potentially. They're going to have to navigate the space created when you're not there, and vice versa. That's what we also have to do as individuals. When we are thinking, actually, this group is taking me in a direction I actually don't want to go, or actually, I'm right on the edge here. I'm protecting other people, but nobody's protecting me, and I don't want that. I want a different pattern for my, for how I want to move through life. It's up to us to create attachments and to let go of attachments. What I found supporting people, and a massive chunk of what I needed to relearn, unlearn through my healing journey, was this process of creating and changing attachments to others and strengthening and improving the health of my rubber ring boundaries. And I've noticed that it's very, very similar for many of us, that there's can be a real contrast, a real pain, even and a real struggle there for us. And we might do things in order to avoid conflict or lessen conflict, or not to have those really difficult challenge conversations, because that might include real truth from us. It might include vulnerability on our part. And for whatever reason, in society, we've come a little bit fearful, I think, of those deeper conversations. And I'll maybe unpack why through this deep dive, this chat into these boundaries. But at the crux of it is we've kind of been taught to compromise rather than delegate for ourselves. Delegate's not the word. Advocate. Sorry. Advocate for ourselves. So self-abdication has kind of been taught to us as compromise. So very often we can be very good at compromising and not very good at conflict resolution. And for me, conflict resolution should be about finding a win-win. A win-win-win, even, depending on how many people are involved. What compromises to me is a lose-lose. And what compromises to me is people-pleasing. And we'll unpack why as we talk through the podcast. Reason compromise tends not to work out, in my experience, ever, is because the idea of compromise, most often, the way we use it, especially in the society I'm part of, is it's based on the idea of sacrifice. And then the idea that sacrifice needs to be giving up of oneself, giving up on certain things, and ultimately losing out. Missing out on something, giving something up. That might not always be a negative thing, but I'm just saying that's very often what I've identified to be the root of compromise. And we're taught how to compromise before we're taught, if ever, we're taught conflict resolution. And we're taught to please others and sacrifice ourselves very often. And it starts through our indoctrination in schooling. I don't necessarily want to go into all of that, but it's important generally for what a lot of us have been brought up into, or it was important at one point, that children learned how to compromise, because the hierarchy, the society that was created it's a triangle. It's a hierarchical triangle, and you have to listen to the people above you. And that means that you're going to have to sacrifice your autonomy in order to do that. And that's what was often indoctrinated into most of us at school, is you will listen to the teacher, you'll do as you're told, you'll stay in this room, you'll find the right answer regardless of what you think, feel, and want. Same at home for many of us. It's not necessarily for this chat important where that comes from, but that is ultimately the wound that we're trying to unpack, the conditioning we're trying to unlearn in order to create healthy relationships without this dynamic of power, without this need to compromise. And instead, what conflict resolution is finding a win-win. In a compromise, people, it's like the idea is that we're so often been taught is, well, I want this, but I'm not going to get it, so I'm prepared to do that. And you want this, but you're not going to get it from me, so what are you prepared to do? So we both are not getting what we want, but it's a bit better than not getting what we want. I don't know how well I've explained that. But ultimately, that mostly is what compromise tends to be these days. When we talk about compromise, people are trying to figure out something that's better than nothing or better than detachment often. And it can go on for a really long time, and we can become lazy in that, or become not lazy. It's not about laziness. What it's about is we're always trying to find efficiency. Our human minds, our human bodies always want efficiency. And if we figured out that compromise, which means sacrificing, which means not getting what we want and getting something better than nothing, is our goal, then we'll just go along with other people because we figure out that's easier. That's how we get in these patterns of people pleasing, codependency. And it almost feels like the reason that we do that is because we can't survive without the group, that we can't survive as individuals. Just kind of what I talked a little bit about earlier, didn't I? Touched on that idea of this oneness and oneness. In our modern society, though, we can survive without the group. We still need each other. As I said, I've never met a person, and I've met lots of people living in lots of different situations who is completely independent. We need each other for food, energy, or everything. Even if you live alone, right? Even if you live alone and you've got no friends and you intentionally don't have colleagues, and you're growing your own food, you're raising your own meat, you're getting your own energy and stuff, we still need money for some things. And money is like, a resource trade often, and that is based on a trade that requires someone else. If you don't have all the resources that you need to survive yourself, which many, the vast majority of us don't, then you are dependent on other people. And so there's this deep, and we know that, and I think this for me was why I had to spend a lot of time like learning some of the skills so I didn't feel so vulnerable to detach. So by that, I mean, I had to learn how to grow my own food. So I know if the worst ever happened, push come to shove, I do know how to grow food. So although I might not be as voluptuous as I am now, I probably wouldn't starve and die. I could keep myself going because I know how to grow food and I've got a seed supply. There we go. That's one less fear for me to have to feel attached to a group that could potentially hold some power over us, because that's what an attachment is. An attachment has some sort of benefit, and benefits very often are loaded with some sort of power dynamic if they're based on compromise. And what most of us want is healthy attachments that are based on consciousness, on win-wins. So in order to find those win-win attachments, we're going to have to learn to let go of the compromise, the lose-lose attachments. And there might be lots of things that we have to do or learn for ourselves in order to give ourselves the knowing, the self-esteem to know that we can be less vulnerable if we go out on our own. And building ourselves up in this way, filling our own rubber ring with our own tools, with our own, if you've got your own resources, means that you're not quite as reliant on other people. So what it does is it slowly removes this fear of attachment, fear of losing attachment, sorry, that we have had since birth, like because we're born needing our mothers. We're literally born attached. Like think of the umbilical cord. We are born attached to our parents. We are literally parasites living off our mother's energy supply, and without her, we die until we're born. It's like an innate. It's our first primal fear is to not be attached to others. But as we become more resourceful and more able to take care of ourselves, we don't need these attachments. And we might want to be more discerning about who we're attached to and what supply we're getting and things. And that's very often this inner conflict that we have when we get to this point where we're wanting to set and understand boundaries. Because we're feeling like we're not strong enough in ourselves or capable enough in ourselves, or we're not enough. We're not enough as ourselves. We haven't got enough. We just don't feel like we're capable of being ourselves without the group. Yet the group is not serving us. We want to set these boundaries because we're realizing this group's not for me, or I want to have a longer distance from them. I don't want to be a bit attached, but I don't want to have to be like right in the thick of it. Or as I said, we might realize we're being used as a scapegoat or being drained of our resource, whatever it is, whatever realizes situation that we realize we're in with our attachments to others. We get this feeling like we want to change things, but then we notice we can't change things because of how tightly we're attached to others. And it creates this dynamic, as I'm trying to explain, between this desire for our own autonomous freedom, strength, ability, and our reliance on others, and our need to belong, and our deep desire that we have to want to belong and to not have to, because hard work being independent. It's hard work having to do all this stuff yourself, So when we create beneficial teams and beneficial groups, it should make our life easier. That's why we formed them. That's why we formed tribes and villages, and why we stayed together in groups in order to survive, was because, well, rather than me having to create everything I need to survive, why don't we create everything we need to survive? And it means that there's less burden upon the individual then. And it's constant balance between those two dynamics within us primarily, I think. This desire for us to have our own autonomy and direct ourselves through life, and the desire for that to be easy, enjoyable, and interesting for us. But the reality of navigating boundaries or having a mastery of boundaries is to, I think, or what I found, is to not have a fear of being alone. And so then other people don't have that power over you. So it's to remove that fear of our own vulnerability, the lack of skills that we have. And that might come from building our own, which is again exactly why I've created Love School, because this was all the stuff that links together that I needed to learn and understand, and I want to share about, because that's what gives us the tools to be able to have this sort of strength and freedom, is to have the skills, or enough skills, that we know we can advocate for ourselves and create for ourselves what we can, gather what resources we can, use the resources that we have well, and that's tools and that's skills. And then if we haven't got that we've got well, again, it's another skill of communicating and self-advocating, so that when we do need to rely on others, we get what we want and need, and we get it without too much hassle, without too much looking around, and we get it from people who want to give it to us, so we don't have to have this compromise of the lose-lose, that it's a beneficial arrangement for somebody to give us what we want, and if there's a requirement to give something in return, we want to give that, so it's a win-win. I think most of us want that sort of scenario. I know that's definitely what I wanted. And then you also then because if you build up your own strength and your skills, there's not as much fear of losing others. And what that then does is dissolve the power dynamic. It dissolves this codependent habit. It dissolves this hold other people can have of us. And it really does come from a strength of learning how to be alone, even through grief, even through missing people. And then we're not bound by these attachments that hold us and bond us to others, and we're not fearful of losing them. And for the most part, that's what I've found myself supporting people through again and again and again, is this pain that we feel when we're considering breaking an attachment with somebody, the fear of losing people. What I tend to see as my job, or what I help people to do, is to have the skills so that that fear just dissolves itself, because we feel and know we are strong enough, wise enough, bright enough, articulate enough to navigate life ourselves. And then if we are going to create connections with others, that they're win-win connections. But going through the process then of disconnecting from people is where all the pain can come in, because each of those disconnections or realizations of disconnections does is highlight a weakness of ours, and a reliance potentially then on others. And it can be painful when we realize that the partner that we have is just not capable of meeting our needs to create a win-win, isn't willing to try to create a win-win scenario. It can be painful to realize that people have been rinsing and taking and draining our resources, and we've allowed that. This is what the shadow work is that I talk about. Why have we let that happen? Because we need to understand if we're then going to be disrupting our experience, our entire life structure, and the structure of people around us that we care about, because we've decided we want something different. If you're going to do that, I think you should be blooming sure of what you need to learn from that scenario, so you don't just do the same thing again. Don't just move on and do the same thing with different people and then ultimately hurt other people or ourselves, as we have to go through another detachment process again. Once we're able to master this art of attaching and detaching, almost like a dance, imagining the flow as things floating on a river connect and disconnect from each other in groups as we move through life. As we become more confident in that, more wise, more discerning, that we don't make these same mistakes again. We don't have the same vulnerabilities. We don't have the same weaknesses. And what else I've noticed is that this applies very often to every area of our life, whether that be dating, romantic life, whether that be when that's a committed relationship, when we're married, with our family, in our work. They're all different attachments we create based on agreements, assumptions, shared resource generation. They're all generally created for those reasons, and we generally have a pattern or style of creating them that we've gotten used to based on our upbringing and what we've been taught. So the struggles very often that I support people with, and that I then, and I in my own journey had to learn to overcome, is this root of vulnerability. So all that being said, let's consider solutions. And the solutions are really simple. They sound really simple. The solutions are being able to manage our own responses, our feelings, our emotions, our pain that's associated with our fears and and the process of attaching and detaching from others, especially if we've gotten used to doing that in a way that is based on trauma bonds, and that have a lot of meaning behind them, a lot of story and narrative that our life has been structured around on them. Those feelings can be deep, they can be powerful and strong, and they can really cause us to have to really feel, think, and consider things, in a profound way. But the simple solution is you have to be able to manage your emotions and your pain in order to master boundaries, because the boundary is set for your experience, for your benefit, for your survival. You're protecting that rubber ring at all costs, because if it gets popped or overloaded, you're drowning. And that's exactly what our nervous system is wired to do. It's going to give you a warning signal in the form of pain, discomfort, when we are concerned about drowning, when we're getting overloaded, when there's damage in our rubber ring, when it's not supporting us. That's why we're going to get these emotional responses. So being able to manage our own pain and understand and process our own emotions is vital to setting boundaries. The next thing is we need to be willing to follow through with the boundary setting. So the boundaries are about us and keeping us safe in the group and us safe in regard to navigating life. And we have to be willing to follow through. So that means we have to be able to trust in ourselves. And if we can't trust ourselves, build the skills that we need to be able to trust ourselves. Because our lack of self-trust is most often a lack of skill, and skills can be learned most of the time. And we have to be able to keep our word and follow through, knowing that we can navigate life by ourselves for a while if needs be, while we're finding different support if needs be. And that's as simple as it is setting boundaries and holding your boundaries, following through. It's being able to manage how you feel as you're trying to set them in order to ultimately improve your life and your experience. And then whatever happens, that's going to cause different emotions, different responses, and follow through. Because as soon as you give up a bit of yourself, sacrifice, all of this, you're drowning that little bit more. And all right, we can probably survive with a bit of water out of our rubber ring and a bit of damage and a bit more weight than we need on there and all that. But it's still, we're not going to thrive with that. It's still compromising us. And most of us want to thrive, And a lot of us, especially if you listen to this podcast, you believe that's possible. You're invested. In fact, beyond believing that's possible, you're investing your time and energy because you know that's possible. And you're just figuring out, well, how do I get a piece of that? How do I get a piece of this thriving action that people are talking about? And for me, when I found out, it's because they've got boundaries and I didn't. And it wasn't even as if I was the sort of person who just was dragged through life by other people, or the other extreme, just drifted along and let life happen. It wasn't like that at all. It was just I had mastered the dance of this attachment and detachment and letting go. And I had so much fear behind all of that I wasn't aware of. And by unpacking all that fear, but being able to process and manage all of those emotions and the fears as they come up, whilst I'm now attaching and detaching from people, building that self-trust allows me the freedom to then move through life with much more confidence, ease, because I know that I can handle some of the turbulences of life. I've got my rubber ring is strong. Got plenty of tools in there. Yeah, I hope that's making sense. Some of the hardest situations that arise where we want to set boundaries is when we have these long-term commitments. And what a long-term commitment is, it's a promise of attachment, isn't it? And I'm talking more specifically here about marriage and children. And even employment. I didn't like that long-term commitment in employment. Some people like that stability, don't they? But that's ultimately what it is, like these long-term commitments that we create. And we create them in order mostly to create some stability. But what happens when that connection creates instability for us, whether that be a partner, a boss, or a child? And the power dynamic again can be really similar in all of this, depending on the bonds and attachments that have been created in this. And that's a lot. I find a lot of people struggle with the fear and pain around navigating that. Because at the root of, say, a marriage that's in trouble or a long-term partnership that's in trouble is not only do we lose that person if we can't create a win-win and the compromises are getting too horrific for us both to even tolerate, it's drowning us both. It's that self-trust, you see, because we think, well, I trusted in this, agreement when I made it. If I'm not able to follow through or that was a big mistake, what does that mean about me? And this is why I think we have to be open to like learning and building skills and be open to see what can be changed, because it might be a case of that the reason it's not working out is because of a lack of skill. And I think we should always try and build our skill before we walk away from these agreements, because walking away from these agreements, if we haven't built the skill, it's just a lack of integrity, it's a lack of accountability, it's poor character. It's poor character is what it is at the crux of it. But if you've built all the skills you can and you're doing everything you can, and that agreement still isn't serving you, then cutting that cord is self-preservation, that is integrity. If it was going to drag you down and drag you into drowning, and you don't want that for yourself or your family or whatever it is, that connection, being able to let go is not a lack of integrity. But if you're doing that literally out of panic, fear, and a sheer laziness not to want to learn how to do things better or try to do things differently, that's going to have a big ripple effect on other people's lives, then maybe to me that's just a bit of cowardice. And I think focusing on the skill building first, just kind of, again, what Love School is there for. With your children, it's slightly different, but it's really similar, because if we all have to go through a process of detaching from our parents. But when we are a parent and we have a child in our care, and we've created that almost that like long-term commitment, isn't it, to like raise the child, if we don't do that, what's the consequences? Well, again, that's what we're worried about. We're worried about being judged by other people in the rest of society, that we have caused a problem, a burden for society, or that we don't have the skills to fix it. And that means we can't be trusted. Do you see how all this is just about trust? It's about self-trust, trust of others. And it comes down to that willingness to be able to be integral and follow through. And because if you don't take care of your children, or if you're not able to take care of your children, or if your children are so overwhelming, you are not the person to manage them, what's the outcome? What's the response we've managed to come up with as a society? It's a social service, isn't it? Putting your kids in care, all that sort of thing, which we've made, for whatever reason, shameful in our society. We've put that in the list of that you're not trustworthy and you're a failure. So we fear that. We fear that over improving our skills, which is, if we thought of social services and this sort of thing, it's like family connection, relationship, skill building, we would see how much of a common benefit that is, and how many experiences as a collective we have in common with each other. Everyone listening to this podcast is interested in improving their skills in relationships, So if sometimes that in some relationships that becomes really overwhelming for us, but there's no way to get that support, then there's no shame on us, to change those connections. But we've created a dynamic where it seems like there are So the stakes are really high in our modern society, that it's assumed we're going to be good at this sort of stuff, but actually we're not taught it. We're not taught it at all. And that's, again, why we've created Love School, is to be able to learn this for ourselves and build those skills. Because then once you've built the skills and you know, well, actually, I know what I need in relationships and in attachments. I know how to hold them and change them and move around. I know how to keep this healthy for myself and the people who I'm connected to. I have those skills and I trust myself and I'm willing to follow through. We create the connections that work for us. And then that's the point of the boundaries in the first place. I hope that makes sense. And the reason I wanted to speak to it, like I say, was because a few people that I've been supporting, I've been struggling with the same theme, or just even just people I've chatted to as well, like struggling with this same theme of not being able to trust ourselves and hold ourselves in our own boundaries while we relate to other people, and then the pain and the disturbance that we experience as we go through that, and the contrast in, you know, this wanting to be an individual and also wanting to be connected, this oneness and oneness dynamic. There's no right or wrong answer to boundaries. It's what works for us, because it's basically the skills that we're mastering as we navigate through life, being aware that life can be dangerous, even life can be beautiful, and we are seeking always as individuals, most of the time, to avoid the danger and move towards what we consider to be more beautiful or harmonious, and that other people and other things are obstacles or opportunities that are going to either prevent us or support us in getting where we want to go, and that those interactions can mean some sort of conflict exchanges. And yeah, if we don't have the skills to manage all that, then life can be really dangerous. And if we do have the skills, then life can be an adventure. And it is as simple as that. It is honestly as simple as that. And the more that we face the reality of our situation, dive into it, unpack it, learn from it, experiment, build those skills, allow ourselves to be wrong, make mistakes, but keep trying, the more that we build that self-trust, and the more that we gives us options then as to what we do as we navigate through life. I hope this hasn't gone too intangible, because actually the message that I just would love people to understand is that we already innately know the issue of creating boundaries. We know why we want to be in connections, and we know why we don't want to be in connections, and it's only the skill that we're lacking. So once we have the skills, it's very often just comes down to a really simple choice, which is why we have these boundaries. Is this situation and these people helping me to thrive, or is it supporting me? Well, is it helping me to survive? And then is it supporting me to thrive? Or is it actually making my situation more difficult, or taking me in a direction that I don't want to go? It's like that simple. And when you don't have fear and you think, well, actually, I don't want that situation, so I'm not even going to be connected with that group of people or that vibe or that whatever it is, and you can just move away from it. Setting boundaries is easy peasies. So if you're stuck setting a boundary, it's likely because of this dynamic that actually there's just fear, a lack of self-trust, a lack of skill, and fear underneath that. And then your job is to unpack what is the fear, and therefore identifying what skill that you need to work on in yourself in order to be able to free you from these situations and to have stronger boundaries. Thank you so much for listening to this. It's been a bit of a long chat, hasn't it? But if you are really trying to navigate boundaries, I hope this just kind of clears it up a bit for you, so you just really understand the point of boundaries, you know, and you understand both the simplicity of creating them, setting them, and why we have them, and then also why it can potentially feel complex not to be able to do that easily. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I will check you out again, or you will check me out again, hopefully, at the end of next month. If you have any suggestions for topics or chats specifically, or get any guests that you would like me to invite in, let me know in the comments. If you've got any feedback, any questions about this particular topic, about boundaries you want to get stuck into, again, let me know in the comments. If you feel like you want more support of this, or you need to do your own work on this, remember, Love School is there. We have several courses that can support you with this process of getting to know yourself better and being able to get more skillful at setting and creating boundaries. Check out Love School, or just send us a message, and we will recommend the best course or bundle of courses or whatever for you as you navigate this journey. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Fools, where we have been exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you as part of Love School, where we explore what it means to love self, others, and everything. For more information, come and have a look at our site, www.loveschool.uk.